I was at the University of Houston going to school, and I had been invited to come to the alley for free. And I'd gotten these free tickets and I was very excited, but I couldn't find anybody to go with me, and I was too scared to drive in downtown to come. So shortly after that, a friend of mine that worked here invited me, and I saw our town, was blown away. And then I applied. She got me an interview for the box office, and Ruthie hired me, Ruthie Rodriguez from the box office. And that's sort of how it started. I was here for a week and screwed something up on a Friday night. I left crying. I planned on quitting the next day, and Ruthie talked me out of it, and that's what happened. It's all her fault.
Oh, yeah.
I was in the box office probably for about maybe 5 years, and then I moved into the group sales department.
Okay.
And I did that for several years. So after I did group sales for a few years and just really realized that my talents weren't in the marketing department, I was looking at other opportunities around town, because I thought, what else could I do at the alley? And at that time, the managing director, Paul Tetro, met with me and said, well, if you had another job at the alley that you could create, what would it be? And so at the time I said, well, we don't have anybody that's in charge of events in general to keep everything consistent, and we didn't have anybody that was sort of like a building manager, and we didn't really have anybody focusing on things like security. And so I made a list of 5 different jobs, and so he took the list and goes, that's great, and he stuck a title at the top and just made me do all of it. And I think for me, what was so exciting that it was sort of neat to be able to start from scratch, to build the department, and to create everything from the contracts that we would use for rentals to, figuring out my staffing. So it was very exciting. Well, it's really sort of a crazy job at this point, because in the early 2000s, the alley suffered from Tropical Storm Allison. And at that point, when we were in the middle of all of the renovation of our small theater that we had lost and the production center, I took on a lot of responsibilities that were normally under the general manager. So in addition to being in charge of all the rentals of the building and all the meetings, so my department coordinates everything from space use to when somebody comes in and wants to do a meeting or a pre-show party. But then I also took over things like being in charge of the housekeeping department and the bar, as well as, the security system. And so it's a catch-all, but it's more like property manager meets event manager.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I fell in love with the alley when I first started working here because I knew the history, and one of the things that I've done over the last 25 years is I've really sort of jumped into the archives and done all of my research about Nina Vance and how she started the theater, and some great, wonderful stories of, times back before I was here. And I just love the energy of this place. I just love it. I love to watch the rehearsals. I love to watch the shows, sometimes multiple times, so you see the difference between the beginning of the performance and the end of a run.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I think some of the most amazing things I've ever seen staged have been here at the alley. I saw Michael Wilson's production of Streetcar Named Desire, which is once again a show that for the first time I understood it more seeing that production of it. I mean, Annalee Jeffries played Blanche, and I will never see another production where I will ever imagine a Blanche being as amazing as her performance in that. So that, we saw the entire 7 hours of Angels in America in the new house, which is the first time it had ever been done in the round. Tony Kushner was here for it back in the 90s, and I get chills thinking about it now. It was just unreal seeing that production, and I watched it all 7 hours multiple times.
Right.
So, and then we're lucky because we get shows like Let the Right One In come into the, which is not an alley production but a brought-in show, and I have to say, I saw that one 4 times, and yeah, can't beat it. So. I have lots of great stories, though, you know, even stories that I'm not a part of. Like, one of my favorite stories ever is when they first founded the alley at the old dance studio. Somebody had donated the wood for them to use, but they ran out before they finished all the platforms. So Nine Advance literally sent them to her home and had them dismantle her sun deck to finish I just love that story.
It's a great story.
Well, to me, it just shows you the sort of dedication. And I see that in a lot of people that work here right now. You see these amazing sets and the fact that it takes them, you know, all these extra hours of it. They do it and they might complain, but at the end, you've got this gorgeous art that, you know, you can't argue with. And I think that sort of was established with that sun deck and just followed through for the last 72 years. So it's pretty cool. I was a member of a community theater that started off at the middle school, and then we ended up, you know, moving into what was the old opera house in the middle of our downtown square and renovated it. And, you know, for years we had a pole in the middle of the stage that we would have to incorporate into the play. Sometimes it was a tree or whatever. And so it's one of my favorite stories too, when you listen to the stories about the original alley, because there was a tree that grew up in the middle of the space that they said during the stormy days, the audience would have to either sit with an umbrella or because water would trickle down the tree trunk. And it just reminds me of how we all that really love theater get started, you know? My favorite role I've ever played was Grandpa Pennypacker from the remarkable Mr. Pennypacker, which is this old play about a man in the, like, I think it's the early 1900s, and this man named Mr. Pennypacker who has two families that don't know about each other. I mean, you know,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
And they all discover each other, but I was the grandfather. I don't know. I just loved it. It was fun, and it was at Kilgore College, which is the home of the Mighty Rangerettes, the first drill team ever, which is, you know, my favorite other thing. So